and welcome to Magalia Rose Studio. This demonstration video is sort of a follow-up to my previous video, Using YUPO Hints and Tips. In this particular demonstration video, I will be showing how I create the painting of the elephant mother and baby using YUPO and watercolor. Some of the techniques we'll use for making texture include alcohol, sponges, stippling, and just plain water. You will also have some spatter technique shown. The video is somewhat long and I have speeded up most of it, so feel free to go to any section that is of interest to you in creating your own painting. Remember, when you are using reference photos, be sure they're not copyrighted, and please try never to follow another artist's work exactly. You have the techniques from this video to create your own work, as for many of the other videos available, so make it your own. Well, let's get on with that painting. Here you can see I have my drawing transferred to a larger piece of YUPO, and I used a number 2 mechanical pencil and a white box to transfer it from my sketch. And although excited to begin the painting, I do realize from long experience that there are a few things that I want to have prepared and ready as the need arises to use them. Of course, the first thing are the colors. I like a very simple palette when I'm working with YUPO, and I like colors that I'm comfortable with having them mix, getting results that I do enjoy. This particular painting, much as if another painting called the Bull Elephant, will use quinacridone gold, alizarin crimson, Payne's gray, and Prussian blue. For the final grasses around the area, I will also activate the Davies gray and use also the Quin gold. I like to keep it simple, and it is usually more effective, especially in the beginning, if you do that. Now I'm going to go back to looking at the drawing, and what I'm going to be using also, of course, I'm going to be using a number 2 very soft quill brush. This is the only brush I will be using, and of course there is some 70% alcohol that I'm going to be using for texture with the elephants. So now that I'm pretty comfortable, I have some paper towels here so that my hand never rests on the YUPO. I have additional towels over at the side so that if I need to mop up any of the paint or water, I can do that. So we're about ready to actually apply paint. So let's get to that. I'm going to go ahead and begin with this ear on the far side. And the first thing I like to do is determine a little bit of where the sun is, or the light source. And in this case, as with another painting that's going to match this one, the sun's kind of coming down this way and a hair behind. So I'm going to add some nice quinacridone gold to this edge where the light might be shining through a little bit onto the elephant's ear. Rinse my brush, take some moisture out. Now I'm going to come in with some Payne's gray. I'm going to begin this over near the body of the elephant, and as you can see, I'm sort of keeping away from the quinacridone gold. I will be blending, I will be getting over there, but right now I just kind of testing the waters a little bit. I have mixed a little dish soap with my water to keep it a hair more viscous. I'm going to come in with some Prussian blue where this more shadowy area in here might be. And here, I pretty much know the effect that that blue is going to have with the gold. And now, just for fun, because I love purple tones, I'm going to get some alizarin crimson and just kind of put it in there in a few areas. That looks like a fine, interesting layout for me. I'm going to take the alcohol. Usually I will cover areas if the alcohol is going to interrupt another wet area, but everything's dry, so I'm just going to go ahead and just put in a little bit of that alcohol. Looking at those wrinkles in the ear. Now if this ear is kind of thin, it might be actually letting some of the light through. And I'm going to come in with some more Payne's Gray, darker. Get it into this shadow area behind the face of the elephant. And I'm going to really dry my brush a bit now. The funny thing with YUPO is you oftentimes don't really know exactly what you're going to get until you've got it. Let's grab a little more of that Quin Gold. Get it right to the edge there. Let that sunlight show through. This little fold up here. Don't worry if you go outside the lines a little bit. Remember, we can really change how that YUPO is going to appear. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and give it a final spray of alcohol, and then I'm going to let it dry. I'll be back in a few minutes. The YUPO is now completely dried in this area around the ear, and I'm just taking clean water and my brush, and I'm going to lighten certain areas a little bit, and I'm just going to do that by reactivating the paint. And running it along those areas. And there are these little folds, kind of interesting little aberrations in the elephant's ear, and I'm just going to kind of pull some of those out. Now I don't want to ruin a lot of the texture that's developed from that alcohol spray. Some of it's moved in. That's okay. But I do want to remove some of the extra pigment that's made it a little dark. I want to keep dark near the face, the head of the elephant, because it's going to be lighter so that it'll give the illusion of coming forward. So I want to keep some of these shadow areas. But again, just lifting a little bit can add some interest. And this isn't the final lift necessarily. I'm just trying to get a little more texture in with that lifting. And that's just plain water that I'm using. And then lifting out as it reactivates the paint. Until you spray your painting with a fixative, you can do all the lifting and then reapplication of paint if you desire. But keep those interesting areas. Okay, I'm going to let this ear alone for now, and I'm going to move on to the other ear. Using much the same pattern as I did before, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply a little of the quinacridone gold, and it won't be around the entire ear. the sunlight's coming this way, so I'm going to put it up into this area and into that edge until the edge is going to be obscured by the body of the elephant. The sunlight coming is going to hit this, and it'll only bring it into a little bit there. But for the sake of fun and color, I am going to go ahead and put a little bit in here and there, maybe catching some random light, and those of course will be blended in. Coming again now with the Payne's Gray, same thing. I'm going to come along the head area of the elephant. Notice I'm keeping that arm and edge of hand on the paper towels. Coming in with a little bit of the alizarin crimson. Now I know that alizarin mixed with the Quin Gold is going to give sort of an orangey look. There will be some tints eventually, you'll see, when I put in the Prussian blue of a greenish hue. That's part of the fun of this, and let it happen. Don't over control that. I'm going to bring this over here. I like that blue in the shadows. Makes them sort of cool. Okay. So let's go ahead and give a bit of a spray and see what happens. I'm going to protect this. Not that it would activate, but I just feel more comfortable getting in the habit. Now I'm just pushing paint. Remember we discussed those fun little ruffles in their ears. A lot of this will be lost, but sometimes a hint will remain, which can guide us in our future. Okay. I'm going to lift a little of this. A few dots of the darker. Okay. I'm going to give another spray of alcohol and then let it dry. I'll be back when that's dried. Well, we had a short pause in there for the dog barking incident, a UPS intermission, we could call that. So getting back, it's, we had sprayed it with alcohol, and now I'm going to go ahead and just kind of do a little bit of, with plain water, some blending. And getting some of those, again, those little ruffles in the ears, where they get tattered. They flap their ears a heck of a lot. And they do end up getting a little tattered. You can move into edges, and if something has come out of the edge, don't worry about it, but you can also just lift that out if you want. I'm going to go ahead and just sort of bring that in. YUPO is interesting in how it will sort of avoid putting the color where you want to put the color. And that's where patience does have to play a big part in the process. This ear's still sort of pinkish up there. I'm going to leave it for the most part. Remember also that YUPO will continue to move even after you leave it. Sometimes you'll put some interesting colors in and you'll come back and you'll say, ooh, that's not what I put in there. And that's part of the interesting dynamic of it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that ear. It's a little more colorful, but I can always fix that later if I don't like it. And if I like it, I haven't destroyed it. Both ears of the mother elephant are done now, and I tend to not overthink and get picky at this point. I try to wait until the painting is pretty much all blocked in before I start doing the dance that I call it, the dance with value. So let's go right now into that large head and trunk areas. And again, I'm following the same procedure. I'm going to use some of the quinacridone gold. And even though we do know which way the sun is coming, it's going to hit her head because it's further forward. So don't get all panicky that, oh, that's a shade area. Of course, it can be, and some of it is. But light does go in a straight line, so you have to figure that it can hit the top of the ear and the top of the head equally so. That is my quinacridone gold. I'm going to come in with the Payne's Gray, which is sort of, I consider, the base color. I'm not even going to worry about the eyes at this point. Those will go in much later when this is all kind of dry. The elephant's principal color is sort of a reddish to a gray. It just depends. This mama is going to be mostly a gray elephant with some pretty interesting colors. Again, this is not a time to get into great detail. YUPO doesn't tend to really work well with great detail. It's a matter of when you put those details in. I'm softening some of these lines. And I'm going to look into doing a little bit of the alizarin crimson because we're going to be working toward almost a purple in some of these areas. Now we're looking to introduce some Prussian blue, again sort of in those shadowy areas. And blending with the alizarin, we can get some purplish tones coming through this. Now I know that if I'm getting my Prussian blue into the quinacridone gold, it's going to make a greenish color. If you want to avoid that, you can use a buffer color, which is one that works well with both of them in a different way. So in this case, I'm using alizarin crimson, because it sort of makes a browny, purpley combo with everything, which could be interesting when we apply the alcohol. This little hump is behind the head, and I'm going to go ahead and come in with some Payne's Gray in there. And remember, I can always lift and or darken down the line. I don't have to say this is it, it's over, because it's definitely just the beginning. Okay, I'm going to go ahead now and give a spray of alcohol. First, there's this little blotch here. I do not want that. It's a bit of Payne's Gray that wasn't totally dissolved with the water, my fault. You can deal with that with a dry brush. You can deal with that with a dropper. But it is where I do want shadow, so maybe it's going to be okay. This is a little too blue in here. Thought I was done, but the play never stops with YUPO. I want to get some gray in there. Now, if you've gone this far with any painting on YUPO, you realize, as I told you earlier, the paint continues to move. Even when you walk away. Air currents, gravity, whatever's at work is going to continue to work. I'm going to go ahead and give an alcohol spray again. I know these areas are totally safe. They're dry. But every so often I have sprayed into an area inadvertently wet and caused a heck of a mess. Okay? Okay. Let's watch that settle out a little bit. Bringing in some Payne's Gray. The alcohol dries very quickly, so sometimes it can give you a fun surface to play with. Along here. Notice right now I'm mostly lifting. I'm moving some color, but I'm also lifting. The paint stays very wet for a very long time with YUPO, so you have lots of time to play, to move, to see what's happening. In fact, I've often set it aside for an hour and come back and find it still pretty wet in areas. Okay, I'm going to give it another spray of alcohol. And I'm just going to let it sit there for a little bit. When it starts to settle in, we'll see what more we can do. Okay, now I'm looking at this left ear. I've already played with the ear to our right, her left ear, but I'm going to do the same process on this other ear. And what I like to do is use a natural sea sponge, and I wet it until it's really very saturated. Then I rinse it out till it's just sort of damp, and I gently put it onto the YUPO area. And it starts to blend and add a little bit of texture to the ear. At this point we know that there is water there, and if I want to add another color or intensify color, let's say add a little bit of blue, the Prussian blue. It's nice and moist, and it's just going to come right in and stay there. If I want to enhance that with a little purple tone, I can add a little tiny bit of alizarin crimson. And at this point, you can even still use alcohol. If you still think that's a little too intense, guess what? Simply poking it will move it and turn it into a nice little bit of purple. This is also a time you can review some of the areas. For example, if you wanted your ruffles to stand out a bit more, you can do that. But we're not done, and that's the fun of YUPO. It's a continual process. I'm now going to move on to doing the same process on the head and trunk, but I'll get back with you on that in just a few minutes. Don't let your first application of YUPO leave you wondering what you're going to do. Since it erases so easily, it's almost mistake-proof. Unless you really get us some strange color combinations. I want this area to be a little more subdued. That's a little too blatant as far as the quinacridone gold is. So I'm just lifting and blending a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing with that little area of the elephant's back. Soften that quin gold. It's a little too blatant. You can just simply dry your brush a little bit and lift. And now we have some open areas here, and I'm going to use some Payne's Gray to fill some of this in. So I just get a little bit of gold around that edge. That's what I'm looking for. I'm going to use a clean but very just damp, get a lot of the moisture out, and I'm going to come through and I'm going to lift some of this color away. Each time my brush disappears, I'm wiping it on a paper towel. I can also come through, and there are areas sort of along their faces that are a hair higher. And I want to lift some of the color from those areas. They sort of have an indentation in the center there. I'm going to gently carry this lifting in the direction of those little marks that shows the way the trunk has bent over time. I'm not going to worry too much about that very end. That's going to be a separate issue. But as I'm lifting, you can see some of the alizarin crimson from underneath is showing through. That's because that is a staining color. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and spray a little alcohol on that. I'm going to protect this ear since it's still here wet. And I'm just going to leave that for a little moment, see what I think. Okay. You can see how it moves. I think the most important thing in working with YUPO is not to immediately expect what you're doing to show the result you're planning on. I hope that makes some sense. You may think you're adding a shadow area when down the line it blends, it comes across, and it isn't exactly what you thought it should be. It's a medium that thrives on working with you, but in its own way. You can see I'm trying to shape a little bit. Okay. I'm going to get a little bit of blue in there just because I really enjoy the coolness of the blue. It makes shadows look outrageously nice. And again, a little alizarin. At this point, as I showed you before, I sometimes get into almost a stippling effect to move it, move whatever color I'm playing with, so that it doesn't just sit there. It will move, but sometimes I want to give a little impetus to what's going on. Okay. I think I'm going to give this one more spray of the alcohol and then let it dry. Okay, let's see what happens and how it looks when it dries. Okay, we've got the head and trunk and ear areas pretty well blocked in. That doesn't mean they're completed. And now I'm going to have a little bit of fun and show you how right now we just see our blobs of color. There's not a whole lot of personality. But if we go and we are astute with a very small point brush, let's put in some eyes. Let's give this elephant some vision. Remember, we can always come back, enlarge, erase, and play to our heart's content, but I just wanted to have a face before I continued any further. I'm going to rinse my brush off, and now I'm going to look at this rather interesting area of the trunk, the very end, which is somewhat of a prehensile grasping and has a little point almost like a thumb. And I'm going to just use plain water and a semi-damp little brush here, and I'm going to try to bring out some of the shape of this part of the anatomy of our elephant. And all I'm doing is using a bit of plain water. We managed to get quite a bit of Payne's gray in there, but as I've said before, we can clean that up, which is what I'm doing right now. These are the fun things that later on you can play to your heart's content. Okay, I'm now going to put most of this on a speed it up because you have seen the basic process, the basic colors, and I'm just going to go ahead and continue painting onto the elephant's body. And then I will check back with you after that speeded up video. Okay, as you saw in the speed up, I did apply a little bit of the wet sponge area to the baby elephant just to get some of the colors to move in. Right now I'm pretty much happy with the way he looks, so I'm going to go ahead and say for now it's done. Until I actually use fixative, of course, I can always change that. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a very small dot of the Payne's Gray for his eye. I could use the other brush, but I just didn't want to risk having that spot too big, even though I can erase it. So now what we're going to be looking at is doing the groundwork that we need. And for that I'm going to use quinacridone gold and Davy's Gray. Davy's Gray is a funny color. It's sort of more of a green than a gray, but I tend to find it being sort of neutral oftentimes. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a little bit of the quinacridone gold under their little feet, in the background here a little bit, and carry that out to the edges. If you don't like the where it's going on that, you can just simply wipe it away and say, oh, let's keep the hand steady there. I like to kind of pull the color down a little bit. This simply kind of could be the direction of the grasses. It could be a little bit of shadow, since we know where the sun is coming from. So it doesn't hurt just to kind of make it hint. You don't have to be too particular. I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of that Davy's Gray. I'm going to just sort of drop it in there. This could be some of the grasses drying before they're totally golden. Remember, when you paint, you're making the story. You are telling the story, and that's sort of the fun of the whole thing. I'm going to go ahead now and put a little bit of the alcohol spray on this. See what it's doing. You can take a very soft type of a plastic and make some grasses. Keep your grasses different heights and vary the number. It looks pretty grassy. I'm going to go ahead and drop in a little more of the Davies. Give one more spray of the alcohol. And let's let it dry and see what happens. Well, I think I'm pretty much complete with my elephant, the mom and the baby. I'm going to do some spatter work right now. When I usually do this, I just take a piece of tracing paper, I put it over the main element that I'm trying to protect, cut it out with a pair of simple scissors, and then I'm not worried about the spatter getting onto the actual elephants in this case. Practice your spatter on another piece of paper before you do it to make sure that it is going to do the correct technique spatter that you want. This time I'm just, instead of a toothbrush, which makes a very fine mist, I'm going to use my brush dipped into the Davy's Gray. And all I'm going to do is hit it on my finger. If it gets over into that area, Davy's Gray luckily is not a stainer. I can just go ahead and lift it off. If it goes into any of this area, I don't want it. Same thing, just lift it off. And I can go ahead, and I still want a little bit here. Okay, that looks pretty good. And any extra has gone onto the tracing paper. I can also do more spatter up at the top there if I wanted to bring in some elements such as sky, in which case I would probably go ahead and I would use my Prussian blue with the same technique. Which can add some interest. Prussian's a little more staining, so I'm going to try to go ahead and get rid of any of it I don't want ASAP. And if I kind of like the way that's going, I can leave it. Lift up my little stencil, and I have my elephants. This little spot is a little close, so I'm just going to gently wipe that away. If you want to get a little more interest, you can dab them, but I'm going to wait till they're more dry and then lift off the ones that are up here. The spatter is dried, and I've decided that the painting is probably done, although I do usually wait a minimum of 3 days before I make an absolute decision on whether any painting is done. Here I've put on what I call a working mat. It's an old mat that's been cut to various, I can change it to various sizes. And this helps me focus on the painting rather than anything around it, and understand better maybe how I would like to frame and mat it. I hope you've enjoyed our YUPO adventure. You've learned texturing with alcohol and sponge. We've tried spatter, and you have just learned some of the basics of applying it, which you would also obtain from the hints and tips using YUPO video that I have that's separate. So until next time, I hope you give YUPO a try, and hopefully we'll see you again. Bye.